This is from an interview that I did with Gurf Morlix at my buddy Cameron's house in South Austin. Gurf was really close to Blaze Foley. They were very good friends, and Gurf was nice enough to share some stories about Blaze. I've been a fan of Gurf's for a long, long time, long before we became friends. It's always great to see him. I should warn you that my roommate Daryl is a big Blaze Foley fan, and he might do a run in from time to time. But Gurf was also nice enough to throw in a couple town stories for good measure. So sit back and enjoy Gurf Morlix sharing stories about his friend Blaze Foley.
I met this guy Blaze Foley in 1976 or 1977 here in Austin. I was playing in a band called the Goats of Arabia. And we were playing at the Hole in the Wall, and the Hole in the Wall is on Guadalupe, and there's a marquee out in front. And Blaze was driving in a borrowed car down Guadalupe, and he saw the sign saying "Goats of Arabia" at the Hole in the Wall, and he said, I gotta find out about that." He was intrigued. So as I recall, he went home and woke up the person whose car it was and said, "We got to go see this band. There's a band called the Goats of Arabia." So they showed up at the gig, and Blaze came up to me in between songs while we were singing, and he had a guitar and a guitar case he wanted to show me. And he's a real big guy, and he's kind of bent to one side. He had polio when he was a kid, and long-haired hippie cowboy. And I was just thinking, who is this guy? And I said, could we just talk on a break, maybe? And he's, oh, okay. I went over and talked to him on a break, and I found out that I liked him. He was funny, and we got along. And then he told me that he had a gig coming up in Austin. It was his first gig ever, uh, and it was coming up like that Friday afternoon or something. And would I come to it, and would I bring a bunch of people with me? And I said, "Well, I'll see. I don't know what you do or anything, but I'll see what I can do." And I asked him where it was, and it was in a disco. There was a disco in the building behind the Hole in the Wall. Stupidest place in the world for a Blaze Foley gig, doing a happy hour set in a disco. But I gathered up some people and we went, and we just walked in not knowing what to expect. And there was maybe only 10 or 12 people in there. And so we just sort of sat around him at a table, and he started playing these songs, and I was blown away by his songs. And he had this leather valise with him, and he would like announce a song, and then he would say, "Oh, this is about my friends Billy and Marge." And then he would, "Oh, I got a picture of him right here." And he would pull out, he just had all this stuff in this grip, and it was like show and tell. And the songs matched the photos, and I was just blown away by his music, funny songs and sad songs and heartbreak songs and tender love songs. And I was just amazed. He was really good. Blaze was homeless. He was homeless pretty much the whole time I knew him, except for a short period at the end when he got a little bit of money coming in. But he was homeless, and of course, I had a home, and he thought that was like just a match made in heaven. And so he just was never even discussed. He just like attached himself to me and started living on my couch, and he did for years. Actually, I'd moved a few times, and he would figure out where I'd gone and show up at my new house and live there. And that, I mean, he lived on my couch for years until I actually moved out to Los Angeles, and he couldn't quite make that jump. But um, and we became best friends and running buddies. And anytime he had a gig, I would play it with him if I wasn't playing with anybody else. And then we moved down to Houston. There was work in Houston, and people weren't making much money at the gigs in Austin. Imagine that. There was money in Houston, and there was people in the clubs every night. It was the best scene I'd ever been involved in, really, in this Montrose area of Houston. And we went down there, and Blaze just announced himself to that scene and was accepted completely. He was not like anybody else, and he had great songs. And we were playing 27 nights a month, in our neighborhood. It was really amazing.
It's interesting that you say that Houston was happening. This is a time when the Armadillo was open in Austin, and
Yeah, touring bands could come here and make a lot of money or make some money. But the gigs in Austin were paying $35, you know? They don't pay much more than that now, a lot of 'em. But you could go to Houston and make $75 or $100, you know? Um Houston was booming at the time, and, it was just a really good scene. There was money and there was people in the clubs every night. When Blaze and I were living in Houston and in Austin together, he wasn't drinking all that much. I mean, we drank beer every night in the bars and maybe some tequila. If we were playing a gig, you know, we'd be doing that. But uh, then we'd go home and we'd go to sleep and wake up sober the next day, and everything was just great. Uh, then Blaze met Townes Van Zandt in probably 1979, I think, and everybody that met Townes really idolized him. Um, he was an amazing character and known for his drinking, among other things. His songs were incredible, and Blaze was completely enamored with Townes, and they hit it off and became really good friends. And I think it had a sort of a bad effect on Blaze. He tried to become Townes. He started drinking vodka. He started binge drinking, and it got bad. And he started having behavioral problems, and I saw him get thrown out of bars a lot for good reasons, and I saw him get beaten up. I'd haul him out of a bar after someone would beat him up and he deserved it. But he was my friend and I loved him, so I'd take him home and patch him up. And it just kind of got worse and worse, and he started this long, slow downhill slide into alcoholism and homelessness, and really it ended up with him being murdered in 1989. And I was in Los Angeles, and I got home one night, and there was a phone call on my answering machine, and I checked it, and it was from Lucinda, and she said, "I got something I want to tell you. I'll call you in the morning." And the message stopped, and I just started crying, and it's like I knew it was Blaze. I didn't I didn't know if he was dead or not, but I knew he was dead or hurt bad, and I couldn't sleep that night. And I called her the next morning, and she told me he'd been shot and killed, and I wasn't surprised.
Do you want to describe what happened?
Well, there was an old man that Blaze had befriended that lived in this neighborhood that Blaze was living in. Blaze had gotten a little bit of money from Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard recording "If I Could Only Fly." He'd gotten a check, I think, and had enough money to rent a room in a house. And I saw him, maybe a month or so before he died. I was here playing a show with Lucinda and found Blaze, and he showed me his room, and he was really proud of his first time, in 10 years or something that he'd actually had a place to live. And he was really proud of it. Um, and there was an old man down the street that was Blaze's drinking buddy. And this guy had a son who was a junkie. And the junkie used to abuse his father. He'd beat him up and cash his welfare checks and social security checks, I guess, and take the money and use it for heroin. And he was just a scumbag. And Blaze told me that he had had a couple of altercations with this kid, and apparently the police had been involved, and Blaze was supposed to not be around that guy's house. But Blaze Blaze had been sober for, I don't know, 6 8 weeks. I don't know how long it was before he died. I When I saw him last, he was sober, and he was great. He was making art. He had all this energy, and and then he fell off the wagon some point after that, and he was up drinking with his old man drinking buddy friend in the guy's house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the junkie kid came home, and there was some sort of an argument, and the guy went and got a rifle and shot Blaze and killed him. That was that.
Did you get to attend the funeral?
Yeah, I flew back for the funeral. It was unbelievable. They had a benefit to get him out of the funeral home. They had to try to put together money to get him out, and they got him into the funeral home, but they couldn't get him out, and they were doing benefits, and people were finding money anywhere they could to try to pay off the funeral home, and went to the funeral. It was about 15 degrees, and it was just brutally cold, and more people in that funeral home than I could possibly believe. I mean, he had so many friends. It was incredible. And and when the funeral was over, we went out, and I went out the side door with my friends from Fredericksburg that I was hanging out with, and we got in the little motorcade. Well, there wasn't a motorcade. There were no police. We couldn't afford a police escort to the cemetery. I'd been told where the cemetery was, but I didn't really know exactly where it was. And with no police escort, we were like the third car behind the hearse or something. And uh, we came to the first stoplight, the first red light on Congress, and the hearse made it through the red light, and we didn't. And then that was that. Then we're driving along, trying to catch up with the hearse and the couple of cars that had made it through, and we couldn't find them. And I sort of had an idea where it was, so we were trying to drive down south, look for a cemetery, and then I'd see a line of cars coming back at us this way, and I'd recognize the people, and there were like, as many cars as could get through a green light. There were these groups of cars that were they were crossing sideways, they were coming back at me. Then we'd see a cemetery, and let's try that cemetery, and we'd drive all the way through it, and there was nothing there, not this cemetery. And I would say that of of all the people that I figure tried to find the cemetery, I think maybe only a tenth of them found the cemetery. And then we got there, and it was 15 degrees, and Kimmy Rhodes was singing. She just standing there all of a sudden. And I hadn't met her. Blaze had told me about her. Have you ever met Kimmy Rhodes?
No, I haven't.
She lives in Austin, and she's a pretty incredible singer. And she just started singing, and she sang, Amazing Grace, and it just made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. She was so great, and it was just such a perfect moment. And then people started coming up, and they had rolls of duct tape, and they started putting duct tape on the coffin. Blaze was obsessed with duct tape, and it was really tender, but it was 15 degrees. It was just brutal. We just kind of had to get out of there as quick as we could after that.
I've never heard people talk about Blaze in that context with Townes. Did you like Townes? Did you guys get along? And the fact that he's a bad influence on Blaze, did that hurt your relationship with him in any way? Or
I think Towns and Blaze were bad influences on each other. I also think they were probably really good influences on each other. But the drinking thing was not healthy, and trying to emulate Towns killed Blaze, and it killed Towns, really, I think. Um, I knew Towns a little bit. We hung out some, um, mostly through Blaze. Um, he came to Houston one time when I was living down there with Blaze, and I guess Blaze got him this gig. There was a club called Corky's, and they booked Towns for a Friday and a Saturday night. And they were a little worried about it because Towns had a reputation. He might or might not do a good show, and so they were kind of concerned. And we put together a big band to back him up. It was like a 7-piece band, and of course we had no rehearsal or anything. Maybe we rehearsed for an hour before the show or something. But um, Friday night, Towns showed up, and he had a saxophone with him that he bought in a pawn shop, and he put it up on the stage, and he never picked it up. We did fine that night, and the club was really happy, and the people were really happy. The saxophone was up there, but he looked at it a couple of times, but he never picked it up. And then when the gig was done, we hung out in the bar till like 5 in the morning, like we did every night back then, just drinking and talking to the owners and the staff, and uh, and really what happened was at 5 o'clock, the owner said, "Well, we got to go home." And so we all went home except for Towns, who went out as he was wont to do sometimes, and somehow he managed to go out and stay up all night drinking brandy. And we showed up at 9 o'clock the next night for the gig, and Towns wasn't there, and owners were starting to get worried. And then he showed up maybe 10 minutes late, and he said, "No, I'll do it." And he was loaded. He'd been drinking since he left the bar at 5 in the morning, and and he was kind of out of it. Well, he wasn't doing a really terrible show, but it was getting worse and worse as the night went along. And I'd heard him pick up the saxophone before the set that night and try to play it, and he couldn't make a sound out of it. It was just like, like a 9-year-old child picking up a saxophone and trying to see if they can get a note out of it. He couldn't really even get a note out of it. But he had it up there leaning against the bass drum on stage that night, and the show just got worse and worse, and people started asking for their money back. Crowd was leaving, and then band members started leaving the stage. I was the bass player, and I really I dig the freak show aspect of these kind of things. I was kind of into it, and at one point, Townes was singing one of his songs, and a little switch went off in his brain. And in the middle of in the middle of a phrase, he switched over from English to this Cajun gibberish, and he never spoke another word of English all night. And apparently, he was want to do that sometimes. I've heard stories that he had this Cajun gibberish that he would go into when he got drunk to a certain point, and he went into it, and he just kept singing his songs. He's singing like Pancho and Lefty, but it's Cajun gibberish, and I thought this is really incredible. And so by this point, most of the people in the club have left, and then all the people in the band had left except me and Townes. I'm playing bass, and Townes puts the guitar down and picks up the saxophone. And he said, "Let's play." He started playing "You Got to Move" by Mississippi Fred McDowell, blues song. Boom, 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 and singing it in Cajun gibberish. It's just me on the bass going bum 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 bum, and he's singing in Cajun gibberish, and then he picks up the saxophone and starts playing a sax solo. I swear, he was channeling Charlie Parker. It was incredible. He played the best jazz saxophone solo I'd ever heard in my life. I just couldn't believe this. This is my life. I'm doing this. And when he finished the song, he threw the sax down on the floor and he fled out the front door. And I didn't see him again. We didn't get paid for either night. And I ran into him in an airport maybe a month later. Hadn't seen him since. And I walked up and I said, "Hey, Townes, how's the saxophone coming?" And he said, "I hung it in a tree and I shot it full of holes." And I completely believed him.
Is there any history of him playing saxophone? That you
I
heard anybody else ever say they heard him play sax?
No, although people had seen the sax.
Yeah.
I think the only time it was ever heard in public, someone told me they saw him practicing it one time or something, but he was like that. He had special powers. He wasn't normal. He was beyond normal.
That was Gurf Morlix telling a too good to be true Townes Van Zandt story. And I appreciate Gurf sharing those stories about his old buddy Blaze Foley, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. There's a lot of other stuff like that I keep throwing up about once a week. I hope you're enjoying this stuff. If you are, go ahead and subscribe and tell your friends about it. And I will see you guys next time. Take care of each other.